So I very much look forward to this one. And first of all, we have Bingqin, sorry for the Seon-Hoe and yeah, and their colleagues, and trying to talk about trying to discuss more essential but more marginalized different care work experience during COVID-19 pandemic. Which is very important topic. Welcome. I think what we can do is each of us give a talk for, we have 3 papers. So we have about 20 minutes presentation, and I will give you alarm if you run over time. And then we will have about 15 minutes for discussion. At the same time, if anybody have questions, please feel free to type in the question box. Okay, let's listen to the first paper. Thank you.
Can you see the presentation? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Actually, our paper's title changed a little bit. So the title is Uncovering the Conflicts of Care Idea, Different Care Work Experiences During the COVID-19 Period. I'm the first presenter. I'm a master's student at Yonsei University in Republic of Korea. I'm Seon-Hoe Han, and this research is conducted with Professor Bo-young Kim and Young-jun Chae and master's student Seonwoo Yoon. And I'll introduce the first half of the presentation, and Seonwoo Yoon will explain the other half of it. Okay, I'll start. We all know that the COVID-19 pandemic has influenced every aspect of our life across the border. The impact of the pandemic is reported to be harsher to more vulnerable people, including those who need care, as well as those who provide care for them. The elderly in care facilities is at greater risk for severe illness or death from COVID-19. Therefore, the governor of New York described nursing home as fire through dry grass. Meanwhile, family caregivers had no choice but to take complete care of their family members because care institutions are all closed. Especially in Korea, although socialization of care is spread over 20 years, the tendency of marketization and familism of care is so strong so that the burden of care is passed on to caregivers and care receivers. In this context, we wanted to figure out how are caregivers and care receivers in the various care settings sailing through the era of care crisis. Therefore, we used Dali's analytical framework to analyze the whole phenomenon. Dali classified the perspective of care into 4 categories, and this framework is very useful because it provides a systematical approach to care systems. The first is perceived need. Perceived need includes not just physical vulnerability, but physiological and emotional weakness, as well as economic and social disadvantages. And second is relations and actors, which mean relationship between caregiver and receiver and between formal and informal care workers. The third is resources. Resources could include not only material and monetary resources, but also time, emotion, and moral, etc. Lastly, the microscopic and comprehensive perspective is idea and values. As I mentioned before, like marketization of care, feminism, and care-as relations all included here. This study used FGI to investigate care work experiences and the effects of COVID-19 in different care settings. FGIs were conducted from November to December in 2020, last year. And the theoretical population of this study includes 3 different groups. The first is formal home care workers and formal residential care workers, and lastly, informal family care workers. Actually, we interviewed 2 groups in formal residential care worker group, the Seoul and Daegu, which is the 2 provinces in Korea. We pay special attention to Daegu, which suffered the initial COVID-19 outbreak in South Korea and led to cohort isolation. From now on, I would like to talk about the results of our analysis. The first is perceived needs. We named it as desperate needs in more isolated situation. Due to the strict social distancing and lockdown measures and the absence of government support, physiological and physical conditions of family members in need of care have deteriorated. Some people became unable to walk because they had lied in bed most of the time. And some gained significant weight, leading to overlapping skin, and it made awful smell. In this situation, the care burden concentrated to family members. It is actually reinforcing the familyism of care. Also, people in care homes experienced stricter isolation because face-to-face meetings were completely prohibited. But actually, changing needs of care receivers was hardly mentioned. We thought it's because residential carer dealt with a group of people not assigned to one or two residents. And most residents did not have that many regular visitors even before pandemic. The next part is actors and relations. We examined relations in two ways. The first is care relations by actors, which mean relationship between caregiver and receiver. And second is care relationship between informal and formal care worker. In terms of relationship between caregiver and receiver, especially family carers seem very exhausted because their family members were over-dependent and showed excessive personal attachment. But we also catch positive aspects. Although marketization makes care as a commodity, carer felt Jeong with care receiver. Jeong is Korean word, which means feeling amicable and close about someone. The formal caregivers mentioned that they were doing their care work as they do to their family. Second, the relationship between formal and informal carers are also very interesting. They usually express distrust each other. Informal carers said that former care workers do not provide enough care. On the other hand, home care workers distrust their care receiver and their families because they experience severe abuse by them. Sometimes their family demands too many household chores and even sexual harassment. But both of them are trying hard to seek out constructing good care relationship with each other. The next part will be Seonwoo's Yoon part.
Okay, thank you. And I'm the next presenter, Seonwoo Yoon, and will explain the experiences of care workers when the state did not fully support the material and monetary resources. Both informal and formal care workers have confronted difficulties even before the pandemic, but their specific experiences were quite different. As for the family informal carer, they had to invest most of their time and resources even more. This led them to be exposed to a lot of stress because there were no enough spare time to be alone. Also, they needed to use complicated medical services to be supported and had to have nervous and stressful process to use long-term care insurance services. For the home carers, they had to make individual efforts to address the situation where jobs became more unstable and personal protective equipment should be purchased personally. However, they still showed voluntary devotion while investing more resources. One care worker said she could not leave the current recipient even in harsh situation as she felt pitiful and sorry for the elderly. We also found residential care workers confronted inconvenience, but interestingly, they also felt convenient at work at the same time. This is because the burden and pressure has been reduced due to the fewer visits by recipients' families who check and doubt whether care workers are taking good care of their families. The way how informal and formal care workers have invested their emotional and personal resources and lack of state support made different experiences. As looking through needs, actors and relations and resources invested by them, we found different caring experiences were considerably affected by three main ideas and values on care in Korea. First, the characteristics of commodification of care, mainly caused by marketization, were found in the relationship between informal and formal care workers. As care becomes a product for sale, caring activities would be tainted, which leads to the main characteristics: care without caring and care without valid evaluation. In this kind of care market, informal carers experienced frequent changes of home care workers, and formal workers thought they could be abandoned easily. Also, institutional feminism continuously makes care workers think care as a burden. Institutional feminism is a sort of explicit or implicit demands on familiar duties in various institutions and public policy. This led care workers think care as a burden, which will put on their own families. So one participant said, "It makes life easier if you go into a care home when you're old. If you go there, you make your child a good son and a good daughter." Although care is considered as a valuable work, care still comes as a burden in one's own life. Interestingly, even though expressing concern, anxiety, and complained about the undesirable situation, they still told us how they were attached to the people they are caring for, felt Jeong, and even tried to make close relationship with their recipients. One participant said, "Recipients are our future, so we will be treated well when we do well now." Relationship between care workers and recipients could not be overlooked, even if the characteristics of marketization and institutional feminism strongly exist. So now I'll briefly summarize what we found and what should be done in the near future. We tried to analyze how different forms of care work conducted and the impact of COVID-19 using Dali's analytic framework. Starting from increased needs in more isolated situations without sufficient responsibility of the government, we could find that the increase in care demands were barely met by care workers, especially for the family carers. In the process of caring to meet these needs, care workers told positive and negative care experiences simultaneously. Between care workers and recipients, care was burdensome but could be performed by specific affection named by Jeong. Also, there were some conflicts and distrust between care workers, but they still valued good care relationship even in those circumstances. With institutional support becoming more marginal, care was done by individual care workers, investing more time and resources. And finally, it looks much clearer that the idea and value of care profoundly influence these factors. And specifically, as you can see this slide, some features like undervalued, distrust and conflicts between care workers, and burden were derived from idea and values of care in Korea. These huge pressures by marketization and institutional feminism made care workers stretched thin. The reason why care could be maintained in this situation was because individual care workers have tried to embrace this burden with devotion, Jeong, and care as relation. Although there were three ideas and values even before, the pandemic strengthened these effects when the care demands increased and states' formal support decreased. Our findings shows that families' caring needs had been ignored under institutional feminism, conflicts could occur through commodified care provision, and in the end, care with genuine caring had been discouraged. But most interestingly, care workers are struggling to maintain care relations in this situation. Considering this complicated care works and relations, now the policy response should include how the transformation of the current care institution is necessary. We need to think about how trusted partnerships could be established from the beginning of care provision and how policy could lead and coordinate this process. Since the pandemic allows widely opened window of opportunity to concern about these issues, we should start thinking about the transformation much seriously. And this is the end of our presentation, and thanks for your listening.
Great. So you actually have done earlier, and then it's excellent that we would have some questions. Do anybody have some burning questions to ask? may I ask a question? And yeah, I think some of the theories and reactions you have discussed is very basically some of these theories actually came before COVID-19 came. So, so the issues you have raised is in the case of South Korea is it mainly that increased demand of care and less visit, according to what I heard. And apart from this, is there any kind of because I wonder whether this is kind of an emergency response or you want to make institutional change of it for the longer term?
All right. In terms of emergency response, unfortunately, there are a little of that because actually during the COVID, although the Korea praised as a kind of better response to this pandemic around the world, but in terms of social care sector, it's widely ignored. Although there were evidence that there were less visit, less service. Even the government intentionally asked all the community agencies to close because of the fear of the spreading virus. But in terms of protecting the vulnerables, the people who are being cared, was little support for that. So they are actually abandoned during this pandemic. So it shows how this kind of social care needs were under-recognized, undervalued in the policy response. So what we suggest is basically we need to think about this care more seriously because we are all getting old, and at some point we actually need care. And what happening in Korea, we just end up with your life in a nursing hospital or nursing home or care home, just isolated from outside and family. So, but we have long-term care insurance, but what it works is is kind of market system. So the government, when they introduced this long-term care 2008, they intentionally encouraged the market competition between the providers, and that's the way to make a basic infrastructure of service provision from 2008. So as a result, that's what we are witnessing, because we actually want to see the effect of the COVID-19 on family care and caregivers and care homes. But what we found is a kind of deep problem of this care system. Actually, deep problem we found was actually amplifying the effect of COVID-19 on the families and care workers. So it is the time we have to think again and transform this care system into more relation-based, trust-based system, not anymore encouraging marketization or competition and distrust, actually. So that's what we are suggesting here. Thank you.
And other questions? Or can I just ask another quick one? We still have a bit of time. Yeah, and you mentioned during this COVID period, and because South Korea hasn't really shut down, so so to some extent it's comparable to previous kind of a SARS or this kind of a or MERS and this kind of situation, right? So do you find anything in the care sector that behaves somewhat differently from the previous kind of not pandemic, epidemics?
All right, as far as I remember, during the SARS and MERS, during the MERS particularly, we had some kind of the effects of this breakouts, but it wasn't that kind of widespread impact on society. That was kind of limited range of troubles among the people who are affected. So the scale was not as big as now. It's a way different experience before. But that was the kind of lesson learning in terms of this controlling virus system. So we developed a quite effective system that we use for this pandemic. But in terms of social care, there was not quite a significant impact before this pandemic. So there wasn't that much lesson or change, unfortunately. Any other comments? Other authors can
other people?
Young.
Well, we didn't shut down completely the last time when we had a SARS or MERS, but this time, although it was not very strong, but we still
sorry.
And
How
also
to stop this?
a lockdown. It's okay. Okay. So the problem is the school shut down, the schools and also the daycare center, and except the care facilities, most of them actually shut down. So the many people should rely on the family members. I think this caused the significant social isolation. And according to OECD statistics a few months ago, the prevalence of depression was the highest in Korea. Shockingly, it was about 37% of depression prevalence. I think I also had a survey, the Korean people, and many of people, like 40–50% from time to time, and they felt the isolation and cut the social relationship. And also, when we interviewed qualitatively, particularly the carers, they suffer quite significantly. Care recipients and care and also givers, they kind of felt isolation quite a lot. So I think Korea quite famously known as K quarantine, and we did well about this, lowering the infected cases. But behind the scene, we had a lot of problems as well.
Thank you. I think we have to move on to the next presenter, and thank you. We can continue to discuss later. So we have Sezgi. Am I pronouncing your name right? Yeah, and Akbaş. Yeah, thank you for presentation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sezgi. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Köhner and Mrs. Johnsons and everyone who contributed to the organization. I am happy to be part of this event again as well. As you know, there are some characteristics of the self-employment, irregular income levels, high level of diversity, the prevalence of informality are among them. But there's something more. While wage earners can be protected various extents by the employer in the event of crisis, the incomes of self-employed workers experience in a way that mirrors the state of the labor market. As Bögenholt and Klingelmeyer said, self-employment can melt the most privileged and marginal positions of the society in terms of income in the same pot. As of 2019, countries with a rate of self-employed workers above the average of EU members include Greece, Turkey, Italy, and so on. And Turkey is also one of the countries where unpaid family labor is very common when compared to the member countries. Among the member states, the self-employed population has reached approximately 20 million. In addition, when we look at the composition of the total independent work among countries without employing personnel, it's observed that those operating in this way have a 68% share as of 2015, including the agricultural sector. This rate is 82% in Turkey, after Serbia and with Romania. Being classified as Southern European welfare state, when it comes to self-employed workers, Turkey has restrictive regulations, especially on short-term insurance branches. In this context, limited situations can be expressed in terms of not being able to obtain cash benefits through sickness insurance, work accident, and occupational disease. Family benefits and long-term care insurance also aren't regulated within the social security system in Turkey. Also, as the latest Ahi fund, which Ahi means guild member in historical manner, fund regulation, another fund is being established, which will be financed separately from the unemployment insurance fund of those in paid employment. As of September 2020, nearly 70% of the employed are paid or casual workers in Turkey, and 16% are self-employed, 10.1% are unpaid family workers, and 4.5% are employers. And considering the ILO's self-employment definition and excluding the agricultural sector, 59% of individuals are self-employed. Also, 7.6% of all active employers and 9.2% of all active solo self-employed are over the age of 60. According to information obtained from the Turkstat, a larger proportion of those in paid employment work between 46 and 60 hours compared to self-employment, but 10% of those in paid employment have a weekly working time of 61 hours or more, but this rate is 18% for self-employment. When we look at the registration status, 58% of those who are solo self-employed are not insured. This group, which is significantly prone to receive unpaid family worker support during its activities, has a situation that damages the financing structure of the social security system. As a matter of fact, when the rate of unregistered ones among unpaid family workers is 80%, the fact that individuals are not actively insured within the scope of social protection due to various risks may have important social consequences. The income redistributive function of the system is also impaired. This is the article in the Social Security Law, our Social Security Law, that covers self-employed workers. And I need to add that income declarations submitted to the tax and social security authorities don't have to be same in Turkey. And number 2 is our focus group for this work. And this table shows the lower and the upper limits of premiums. And I need to say that self-employed workers personally determine the premium amount they will pay between the lower and the upper limits. And according to SSI data, as of 2018, approximately 74% of the insured under Article 41B pay their premiums at the lower limit. But data obtained through the surveys, relevant surveys, reveal that 70% of all self-employed workers registered with the SSI have an annual net cash entrepreneur income and of more than the 12-month gross minimum wage. So as a matter of fact, under-reporting of the earnings to be considered as a basis for premium often occurs. And also I mentioned that Ahi Fund, it's a new feature, and Ahi allowance was created so that those who have filed or bankruptcy or closed their workplaces, businesses, can benefit from unemployment allowance like dependent workers. But there have been continuous postponements since 2017 has led to the fact that the Ahi Fund wasn't put into effect and its possible effectiveness couldn't be tested in any period, including the COVID-19. I also want to say that there is rarely a mechanism to mitigate the effects of short-term decreases in purchasing power for individuals who have to cease their activities in the given situation. For small tradesmen and craftsmen who make up their routine with their monthly earnings due to their physical labor, savings are limited unless it's compulsory. And in addition, when it comes to Turkey, the Unemployment Insurance Fund, which is the area where the past or current fund experiences are far from satisfying the public and are used outside of its purpose, can be shown as one of the reasons for the skeptical approach of the insured about the AHİ fund. And this is my field study, and I have some research questions. 3 of them are these. 1, what are the dynamics that reveal the meaning and importance of social insurance? What are the main determinants of premium payment habits? And to what extent and in what direction does the confidence in the social security system change in times of crisis? I used qualitative method and conducted face-to-face in-depth interviews, and there was a semi-structured questionnaire. In the determination of the research unit, a purposive sample of the maximum variation type was preferred. And within the scope of the research, a total of 102 self-employed and small-scale employers were interviewed. 21 interviews were conducted prior to the COVID-19, and 81 interviews were conducted during a period when the measures against the pandemic were reduced in a controlled manner. And this is interviewees by activity, especially hairdressers, barbers, restaurants, retailers, and others, lawyers, veterinary dentists, etc., are among them. And 4 new questions have been added to form in order to get answers how this period affects the work. Customer density, revenues, on access to the credit and support packages, etc. And considering the threatening nature of the pandemic regarding human health, it was deemed necessary to evaluate the importance attributed to being covered by compulsory social insurance schemes. And the average monthly household cost of the interviewees is 387 euros. As of 2020, the monthly household expenses of the interviewees vary between 1/5 and 5 times the gross minimum wage. Despite such a significant difference, it is a striking finding that all interviewees who haven't yet retired pay their social insurance premiums at the lower limit, regardless of their household expenses and their income. Also, the average weekly working time was 75.8 hours, and average monthly net income was 474 euros. There are some different expense reduction strategies. One of them was cash register partnership. And for example, even if a de facto employment relationship has been established, cash register partnership, which is not included in our labor legislation, is one of these methods in which only one party is authorized in terms of making decisions about the firm and deciding working conditions. The person who appears as the boss or owner of the firm in the records can continue his activities with his or her colleagues without being responsible for their social insurance. Also, this example is a reflection of extraordinary conditions and their negative economic effects. In particular, tradesmen and craftsmen can often struggle to keep the firm alive with the combined phenomenon, such as the fact that their fixed expenses do not decrease and their incomes are below the usual period. And there were some of the statements that were frequently repeated during the interviews and gave the impression that among the self-employed, there's a group that can be called automaticians in terms of paying social security premiums. For example, I-56, which has an annual turnover of 50,000 euros, but he pays his monthly premium from the lower limit. Especially liberal professionals with high annual revenue have also made it a habit to pay premiums at the lower limit regardless of their earnings. There are several reasons for this situation: lack of knowledge about rights and obligations, having alternative protection opportunities against risks, and the priority of keeping the bureau office store alive in the short term are some of the reasons. While 44 interviewees state that health comes to mind first when social security is mentioned, and 24 of them put the income security obtained in retirement first. In this regard, the age of the interviewees, their health problems and hospital experiences are important. According to research, interviewees have different views on continuing to work after retirement. While there are interviewees who don't want to leave the social life brought about by working, there are also interviewees who state that they couldn't decide to quit their job due to inadequate pensions. And one of my retired interviewees said, for example, I had to close this place for 3 months. I had no income for 3 months, just a pension. Another interviewee, thinking that the requirements of the social contract between him and the state were not fulfilled by the state, declared that he lost his faith in the state during the pandemic and he wouldn't fulfill his social insurance obligations from now on. And he said, of course, my perspective has changed. I used to pay my premium and I don't anymore. I will no longer pay. Like these two friends trust in each other now. You help your friend in difficult times. Your friend doesn't help you in the same way. Will you continue the friendship with this? It's over, he said. And when asked about the most fundamental problem faced in the context of social insurance, 51 interviewees answered as high premium rates. 11 interviewees answered as high retirement age, and another answers are burden benefit imbalance and level of their pensions was low. When we ask about bank loans during the COVID-19 period, 31 craftsmen interviewed during the first wave of period benefit from the craftsman support package limited to 2,500 euros and used loans from the state-owned bank, but it was not grant. And one of my interviewees said that the government is not saying, I will not take money from you for 6 months right now. So you work or not, it doesn't matter. It says, okay, I put you off for 6 months, but postponing it is not something useful for us. It's not clear what will happen after 6 months, he said. And another, as I mentioned, AHİ fund, one of my interviewees says, when we ask about AHİ fund regulation, wouldn't it be nice if there was allowance? At least I wouldn't have to put my employee on unpaid leave. And another interviewee, who is a barber and whose shop was closed for 56 days, states that he was depressed due to financial difficulties and sometimes thought of committing suicide with the following words. Now, if I go out in front of the city hall, if I spill gasoline and burn myself, who cares? Who will see me, or which TV channel will show me to this country? Or which of my colleagues will rebel or go out to seek our rights, he said. Also, some interviewees, electronic goods seller, ironmonger, grocer, telephone seller, glassware seller, tattoo artist, and stallholder are among those who state that they earned more income in the relevant period. And I need to say that one of the factors to be taken into account is that there are differences in terms of earnings, even among self-employed operating in the same activity group. For example, while there's a glassware seller who cannot do business because of his shop is closed, another glassware seller states that his business has increased because he has invested in electronic commerce in the past. And the conclusion. In Turkey, an employer who owns a small business, very small business, maybe 1 or 2 employees, maybe one or two unpaid family worker in Turkey is often entitled to a lower pension than his or her employee who retires on the same day. The main reason for this is that self-employed employers decide freely on the premium to be paid in the declaration-based premium payment obligation. Therefore, in the compulsory social insurance system, a step-by-step adjustment system should be set up, as in the past, based on the income they declare to the tax authority and automatic increases in the premiums they have to pay. And also, according to the interviewees, the inadequacy of the old age pension and other benefits that are entitled within the framework of social insurance in terms of providing a decent life emerges. While retired interviewees state they are far from their expectations and they still have to work, relatively young interviewees see compulsory social insurance as a premium burden that must be endured, even though it will not work in the future. And also, they question the lack of a system similar to programs for paid employment, such as short-time working allowance, cash wage support in the COVID-19 period, which can be granted to insured dependent workers in this period via unemployment insurance fund, where they can receive allowances. And the growth of loss of confidence has to do with the social and economic consequences of COVID. At the time the field research was conducted, in a general manner, Turkey couldn't overcome some difficulties. Social assistance mechanisms didn't work, and social insurance instruments care about partially, but only dependent workers. But in the establishment of trust, focusing on the future rather than the past, an administrative structure doesn't hesitate to inform the insured and encourage them to stay in the system is of a great importance. A more prosperous society may be paid when simplified administrative procedures, simplified social insurance, clarity in terms of the benefits provided, and adequacy in the terms of level of benefits are established. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the very passionate presentation. And do we have questions from the audience first? Have burning questions? Yeah.
I'm Yoon from South Korea, Yonsei University. It's a great, excellent work. I really enjoy your presentation. So I think the story is quite similar here and probably also in other East Asian countries. Self-employed and particularly the small employers are largely excluded from the social security system, and the COVID-19 really exposed that, you know, the weakness of our social security system, you know, this time. But at the same time, still we have a, you know, problem about this, you know, underreporting of income, and the tax system is not really, you know, they are systematically to get the, you know, get kind of the right income for them. And also unemployment, I'm not sure whether unemployment benefit is there for self-employed people or not in Turkey, but in Korea it is a voluntary system for self-employed, and then many people, they refuse to, you know, join the unemployment insurance system. That's another problem. So in the end, I think the situation is there, like you know, like us and in Turkey as well. So any kind of alternative policy discussion, you know, so now you have a problem and 1/5 of people are self-employed and small employers, then what would be the next after COVID? The people have a high distrust against the state system. However, they need actually income during kind of hard time or the retirement period. So what's the kind of a current state of the policy discussion in Turkey?
Thank you very much for your nice words. First of all, I want to say that yes, there's a legislation about unemployment insurance about self-employed, but it will be active in 2023. and because the government said because of the pandemic process, self-employed cannot afford the extra premium burden, the government said. But if it legislated as legislated in 2017 and it goes well, it could be very useful for the self-employed. I don't know what the future brings in Turkey. There are some disturbances, there are some developments about some packages, some support packages system, but in Turkey, it's very common for means tested social assistance programs. It's very common. So self-employed have some revenue, have some income, and cannot take any social assistance from the government. But sometimes their position is very poor, especially more than paid employment. I need to say that just like my English is not so good, so I'm sorry about if I can answer or that or not.
Okay.
And the question and the answers are very interesting, particularly in terms of the high proportion of the people who are self-employed. And I heard that from India, the self-employed people also were somehow unionized. And I don't know whether that is the situation in Turkey as well. No.
There are some occupational unities, but not union. Some guilds like that. From the historical sense, some guilds, some chambers, but they're not. Yes, thanks, Mr. Dare. But it's difficult to pressure. It's a being pressure group if you are not think same with government. Yeah,
sure. Thank you. And we probably run out of time, and we will move on to the next one. And the next presentation is Chae Lee and Ellie Su, targeted or universal social assistance as a policy response to COVID-19.
Okay, can you hear me?
Good. Yeah.
I cannot make this screen. Okay, wait a minute, please.
We can see your paper.
Okay. Hello, this is Jeong Lee from the National Assembly Futures Institute of ROK. Today, I am going to present my ongoing research about the comparison of social policy or assistance policy in the UK and Korea to respond to COVID-19. This research is underway with Ellie. Before the presentation, I would like to ask your understanding of the lack of logical completeness of this research because it is an ongoing study. Okay. The title of a study is Targeted or Universal Social Assistance as a Policy Response to COVID-19, a comparison between the UK and Korea. We started this study based on the fact that existing COVID-19 related studies have not able to analyze in depth what causes different policy measures to be chosen from country to country. Among various studies, Kaphano et al. Finds 80 policy tools commonly used in response to COVID-19 crisis. And we can see what kind of policy tools are applied in the whole world through this study. However, there is lack of analytical study to find out the reasons why which country choose this policy and others not, and then also there's a lack of study to find out to apply analytical framework to examine the policy responses of individual countries. The UK and Korea implemented policies to compensate for individual economic damages caused by social distancing in different ways. Comparison between the UK and Korea is an interesting subject of study since they have different policy approaches, but in the end, there is some similarities between these two countries. Next, analysis framework. We take Howlett's and Chambers framework to examine social assistance response in the UK and Korea. Howlett is a Canadian scholar. He notes that the complexity of the subsystem involved in policy issues and the capabilities of government can determine the choice of a policy instrument. Howlett suggested this kind of table, which is very useful to analyze the reasons of or factors of certain policy choice. And Chamber highlights the importance of looking at the analytical description of a policy by focusing on its key elements. These kinds of key elements he suggested. And based on this, we firstly looking at what is similarity and differences of the policy response in the UK and Korea. And then next move on, we look at the limits and effects of policy response to the COVID-19. And then nextly, we use this Howlett's framework to interpret what is the reason that the UK and Korea choose different approach, and then what is the reason they seem to similar in the end. Okay, we start with the job retention scheme in the UK. The coronavirus job retention scheme, CJRS, and self-employment income support scheme, SEISS scheme, is the representative policy response in the UK in light of a social assistance system. Especially the coronavirus job retention scheme, CJRS, was introduced to keep the employees in work who otherwise might have lost a large number of working hours or employment due to the lockdown measures. Under this scheme, qualifying employees could be placed on furlough by eligible employers, and the employers can claim the cost of furloughed employees up to 80%. On the other hand, the job retention bonus was announced in July 2020, but the CJRS postponed due to the prolonged social distancing in the UK. So we just look at CJRS in this study. And the goals and objectives of the CJRS. The aim of the CJRS was to avoid a sharp increase in unemployment by keeping people employed and prevent a sudden drop in the living standard as a result of unemployed. So the benefits are basically cash transfer, but the UK government used somewhat different ways. From the employer's viewpoint, the scheme is essentially a reimbursement of the expenditure, which employers need to make the monthly claim for the cost through the government. For employees, the form of benefits are monthly wages, even if the amount would be a maximum 80% of reference earning for those who are fully on furlough. This means that although the government introduced the cash transfer system to help the people who forced lack of labor working hours, they just compensate wage, not directly transfer the cash to the citizens. So UK government uses detour to implement these kinds of system. And eligibility, the employee who has been introduced by the employer to cease all work in relation to their employment, or the period for which the employee has ceased all work for the employer is 21 calendar days or more, and the instruction was given as a result of coronavirus. The UK government tried to reduce the amount of money that the government support the employer, so they have these kinds of plans. So you can see that the government contribution is lesser and lesser as time goes by. But initially, the amount of money that the employee can be received from the government and employer is the same. An administrative and organizational structure for policy delivery. The scheme is coordinated by Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, which oversees administrative functions concerning tax and national insurance. The funding method, basically the general taxation. And then according to the ONS, Office for National Statistics in the UK, the tax and national insurance receipt has reduced by 4% compared to the previous year in the financial year 2020 and 21. You can see that during the pandemic, as other countries did, the UK government has increased the borrowings. The national debt as a proportion of GDP increased from 85.3% in 2019 to 104.5% in 2020. Next, interactions among the foregoing elements. Basically, UK has social assistance system called universal credit. So we need to see how can the Cjrs link to the universal credit softly without any conflicts of interests in citizens' interests. UK universal credit rates temporarily increased from £74 to £94, but the proposal for the removing the capital limits, but this was refused. This means that some employees how can I say? Because the UK UC did not be innovated, reformed, after the pandemic, some employees can suffer from the lack of their, the lessening of their standard of living. So the government needs to consider the potential shock that people will have in their standard of living coming off the furlough scheme to go into the UC. So this is likely to financial, the UK government's approach to the universal credit is a kind of keeping financial stability, but they also need to consider how can they smoothly link the coronavirus response to the basic UC system. So policy impacts and limits. The CJRS has been largely successful in keeping jobs. According to the UK government, the Resolution Foundation estimated that if the lockdown continued for 3 months, the unemployment rates would increase to 5.4, 40.1, and 20.8%. but the unemployment rate increased from 3.8 in 2019 to 5.1 in 2020, but to a lesser extent compared to the level initially anticipated by the Resolution Foundation. So these kinds of statistics, however, cannot ensure the net policy effects of this system. So we need to wait for the more accurate policy evaluation to decide what is the effects and what is limits of UK Cjrs. So based on these kinds of policy analysis, exploring, we discussed policy instrument choice. In terms of 4 criteria of funding, public sector capacity, administrative capacity, and regulation, UK can be considered to have a high level of state capacity. From the aim and administrative viewpoint, the complexity of a policy subsystem, UK's policy instruments are market or subsidy oriented. The government refused the proposal that did not directly contribute to achieving the aim, such as the proposed increase to the sickness payment and mediocre increase in the UC benefit. This means that the government, UK government, tried to use the market measurements to overcome this coronavirus pandemic. This is a central characteristic of liberal welfare states where the role of the government remains relatively minimum compared to other welfare states and remains supportive of the functions of the market. The form of support was provided in forms of wages, although the nature of such benefit was to supplement a loss in earnings during the pandemic. This model of payment differs from direct payments that other social security system provided, such as the universal system. This is the most focused section that we looking at the UK system, because they did not use direct transfer, or they did not use support employee or employer individually. They just use the link between employer and employee to guarantee a certain level of quality of life of employees. And next, the emergency disaster aid in Korea. Korean government provided a total of 4 emergency disaster aid, EDA, to mitigate the negative impact of COVID-19 on the national economy during 2020. Characteristics of Korean system is that the policy objectives and policy targets of EDA differed by turn. The first EDA, which was paid in May 2020, provided 220,000 won per person to the entire nation to resolve the economic downturn because by the prohibition of gathering and foreigners traveling caused by COVID-19. But the second, third, and fourth EDA choose to selective support. This is the main difference from the first EDA. The change of the EDA to selective support can be attributed to an increase in the period of collective bonds following the conviction of COVID-19 and an expansion of business restricted sectors. So we look at goals and objectives. The goal of the first EDA was to activate the market by making payments to the whole nation to stimulate consumption. However, the way of transfer this benefit is changed in secondary and third and fourth EDA. So there might be the change of goals and objectives of this system. Forms of benefits delivered is basically cash benefits. The first EDA was provided not by direct cash transfer, but they setting aside grants on individual credit or debit card. However, after the second EDA, the government tried to use direct cash transfer to the beneficiaries' eligibility. In the case of first EDA, which corresponds to the time of the introduction of the system, it was operated for all citizens, so no specific qualification were required. But after that, the EDA was provided to small business owners, mainly to the population affected by COVID-19, and citizens in the targeted group had to be reviewed and to see if they met the requirements set forth by the government. So the administrative and organizational structure for policy delivery is mainly done by the central government, Ministry of Strategy and Finance, but it was promoted by the collaboration of the central and local governments in a way that the EDA's application work was carried out by street-level local governments. Financing method is also by the general taxation. Korea has set up a total of 4 times of supplementary budgets for the year of 2020, raising funds needed to provide the EDA. The IMF warning against the Korean government's recent expansionary fiscal stance. The Korea's national debt to GDP ratio is expected to soar to 70% in 2026. So interactions among the foregoing elements. Except for the first round of general support for the entire nation, the EDA in Korea was excluded from the beneficiaries of a social assistance system. In the process of implementing tax-based social policies, excluding recipients of public assistance has been frequently observed in Korean welfare system. The principle of public assistance is that additional tax support is restricted to public assistance recipients who are considered unable to pay taxes on earned income generated from work. How secondary to full CDA interacting with existing policies to support small business owners has not been specifically examined. The Korean government has been implementing policies to support small business owners with social insurance coverage, but the response rates of self-employed is not high, but the state is providing some of the social insurance premiums to help self-employed people receive unemployed insurance and old age pensions if they cannot generate earned income due to unemployment and old age. But there are lack of studies what is happening during the pandemic with the social insurance system for the self-employed people and the EDA system. Policy effects and limits. According to the report of KDI, the consumption of a first disaster support fund was only 30%. The study analyzed the effect of increasing consumption of the first disaster aid is equivalent to 26 to 36% of the input resources. It is rare to analyze the effectiveness of second to fourth EDA, which was paid selectively to small business owners. The NARS, National Assembly Research Service, discussed the effectiveness of EDA from the second to the fourth by examining the trend of small business sales. But this is not the way to figure out the net effects of policy transition. The Bank of Korea also analyzed the impact of COVID-19 on the Korean economy by breaking down the unemployment rate. The Bank of Korea analyzed that the trending unemployment factor accounted for 3.9% of the average unemployment rate of 4 points in 2020, while the remaining just 0.1% was affected by economic factors related to COVID-19. So based on this exploring, we discussed the policy instrument choice. The shift in policy implementation suggests that the government's perception of policy subsystem complexity has changed, given the government capabilities cannot change drastically. At first, EDA in Korea used a market mechanism to revitalize the market by paying the entire nation, but later switched to direct supporting the targeted group that suffered direct damage from the COVID-19. So according to the Howlett, the first EDA using market instruments are utilized when a combination of a high level of state capacity and high level of policy subsystem completeness occurs. It can be seen as a strategy to intervene indirectly through market measurement and exert wider influence in complex policy systems. So we just move on. It's to the whole discussions. Cjrs in the UK compensates for workers' wage losses by supporting employers, while Cjrs presupposes high state capacity. It is controversial what the UK government has to say about the level of policy subsystem complexity. It could be an example. The UK case is an example of a traditional liberal welfare state's characteristic of the market. Toward the market, Cjrs can be interpreted as market or subsidy instrument and indirect provision instrument at the same time. The shift in the policy implementation of EDA in Korea suggests that the government's perception of policy subsystem complexity has changed, given that government capacity cannot change drastically. Government's ignorance of various situations caused by COVID-19 is mistaken for high policy subsystem complexity, which cannot be ruled out as the possibility of using market measurements in its initial response. However, the Korean government is discussing ways to provide the fifth EDA to the entire nation in the second half of 2021. Universal EDA support cannot be ruled out as an action of political intent other than by the government's perception of policy subsystem complexity, given that the first EDA was universally offered to the entire nation before the parliamentary elections, and the fifth EDA is being discussed ahead the 2022 presidential election. Interpretations not based on Howlett's framework, but the theory of electoral politics and others might be appropriate. Thanks for listening to my presentation, and we welcome the questions and advice needed for developing this research. Thank you again. That's it.
Great.
Okay.
Excellent. We have one question from Bo Yoon Kim. Yeah. Oh, you're mute. Yeah. Oh.
He was not raising hand, he was clapping.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a
question?
Yes, I have some possibly question and also possibly some comments. And also it's a very excellent, interesting work comparing UK and Korea. I think the one comment probably is when you analyze Korea, I think it would be nice to include the employment maintenance subsidy from employment insurance, 고용유지 지원금. The 고용유지 지원금, the employment maintenance subsidy is quite similar to what UK actually introduced. But actually the number of beneficiaries probably is much smaller and expenditure is much smaller than the British one. But the reason why we didn't introduce something like the British one is because we have that similar kind of benefit within employment insurance. So if you can, because when you compare like, equivalently compare, then I think it's also good to know that. And then the second is more like a question, because the universal allowance, like a temporary universal allowance for everybody, is not really introduced in Nordic country or like a continental European country. It was actually introduced and implemented in the United States and also Japan and Korea. So actually, what the liberal kind of welfare state or like a smaller welfare state, they actually, because their social security system, existing system, is not really established well, not very thick. So instead of, because the existing system cannot cope with all the risk, they introduce kind of a wider, the universal temporary allowance. But one of the, clearly the purpose is to kind of stimulate the consumption is one of the kind of reason behind. So, but the British, the UK, known as a liberal welfare state, but they introduced kind of a, the job subsidy, kind of, this is kind of a large expenditure, trying to maintain the current job, which might be kind of a similar, more like a continental European strategy, rather than kind of example of the liberal welfare state. So kind of how do you assess this, the British kind of a policy, whether this is a kind of a feature of a liberal welfare state? If that's a feature of liberal welfare state, then what about the US and Korea, what we did? So that's more like the question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you for your comments and question.
We have 1 minute.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I try to look at the 고용유지지원금 together with the 재난지원금 to compare the UK and Korea. And in case of your second question, actually, Elisa and I discussed, we did not choose appropriate framework to discuss these kinds of system transition, because we just look at the government capability and policy subsystem, but we just ignore the historical dimension of systems. UK, although many scholars consider UK as a liberal welfare states, UK has its own characteristics compared with the US and any other liberal welfare states. So it's a kind of mistake that we just jumping up to the, this is a liberal characteristics of the liberal welfare states. It might be the, can I say, the clue that UK has the very strong and well managed welfare system, so they don't need to use other way. Just they can use the way they just learn to carry out their policies. So we now, Elisa and I, try to find another analysis framework, or we just try to reinterpret this difference as I suggested as the theory of electoral politics or others. So Howlett's framework is not fit to these two countries' policy transition. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, and thanks everybody for coming to this session and the very exciting presentations and comments. Hopefully we can keep the conversation going, and also we also added a journal that is called Urban Governance. It's a new journal, elsewhere new journal. If you have you are interested in submitting to the journal, and you are more than welcome to contact me, and I have my my contact details are on the list of our brochure. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you. We'll probably take a break. Yeah, thank you. Oh, yes.
Thank you very much.